You knew?
Mom, we're thinking ahead.
He'll own it someday anyway.
They never checked the title?
No.
Then they made a very expensive assumption.
My key wouldn't turn. For 36 years, that front door had opened for me. But that Sunday afternoon, I stood on my own porch, staring at a brand new deadbolt while my suitcase rested beside my feet. Then the door opened. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood inside my house. Behind her were moving boxes. My wedding photograph with Robert had been turned face down. Jason and I thought this was the right time to make the transition, she said. You can stay with Rebecca. Jason will own this house eventually anyway. I looked at the new lock, then back at her, and I smiled. Melissa, I said quietly, did you read the deed? Her face changed. If your own family locked you out of the home you built your life in, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe respect should never disappear just because someone grows older, please like this story and subscribe. There's something Melissa didn't know about that house, and it was about to change everything. The house Robert and I built. 3 days before I stood on my own porch with a useless key in my hand, I still believed the most dangerous thing in my house was loneliness. I was wrong. My name is Dorothy Simpson. I was 68 years old, and for 36 years, the 2-story brick house in Henrico County, just outside Richmond, Virginia, had been the center of my life. Robert and I bought it when Jason was 5, and Rebecca was 8. Back then, it wasn't the kind of house anyone would photograph for a real estate brochure. The shutters were faded. The kitchen cabinets were an ugly shade of yellow. The upstairs bathroom leaked whenever someone took a shower, and the wooden railing along the staircase shook if you leaned against it too hard. But Robert stood in the middle of that empty living room on the day we got the keys, stretched his arms wide, and said, "Dorothy, give me 10 years and you'll think we're rich." It took him closer to 20, and we were never rich, but we were happy. Robert was a civil engineer, the kind of man who couldn't look at anything crooked without wanting to straighten it. He rebuilt the staircase himself over 2 summers. He installed the bookshelves in the living room, repaired the porch, and turned a small downstairs bedroom into the office, where he spent countless evenings bent over blueprints. I planted the dogwood near the front walkway. It had been barely taller than Jason when we put it in the ground. Now its branches reached toward the second-floor windows. That house had seen everything. Rebecca's high school graduation party, Jason's first broken heart, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper covering the floor, Thanksgiving dinners when Robert insisted on carving the turkey even though he was terrible at it. It was where my children had grown up. It was where my husband had grown old. And 3 years earlier, it was where I had learned what silence sounded like after the person you loved was gone. Robert's illness had taken more from him in 10 months than age had taken in 70 years. After he died, people kept asking whether I planned to sell. They meant well. At least most of them did. It's a lot of house for one person, Dorothy. You don't need all those stairs. Wouldn't a condo be easier? Maybe. But easier wasn't what I wanted. I wanted my coffee at the kitchen table, where Robert had read the Richmond Times-Dispatch every morning. I wanted to see the pencil marks inside the pantry door, where we'd measured Jason and Rebecca as children. I wanted to walk past Robert's office and remember him complaining about contractors who couldn't follow a drawing. I wasn't trapped in the past. I simply wasn't finished living in the place where my life had happened. Jason seemed to understand that at first. After Robert died, my son became more attentive than he'd been in years. He came over on Saturdays to mow the lawn. He replaced a leaking faucet. He climbed onto the roof after a storm to check for missing shingles. When a light bulb burned out above the staircase, Jason showed up with a ladder before I could even ask. "You don't need to be climbing things anymore, Mom," he told me. I laughed. "I climbed things before you were born. I know. That's the problem." There was affection in his voice then. At least I believed there was. Melissa started coming with him more often about 6 months later. My daughter-in-law had been a real estate agent for almost a decade, and she could walk into any room and immediately estimate what it was worth. At first I found it amusing. She'd stand in my kitchen and say things like, quartz countertops would completely change this space. I'd answer, "The countertops work." Or she'd glance toward the backyard and say, "If you added a screened porch, the resale value would jump." "I don't plan on reselling my breakfast," I'd tell her. She would laugh. But slowly her comments changed. One Sunday afternoon while Jason was outside cleaning the gutters, Melissa sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You've got nearly 2,400 square feet here, Dorothy." I looked up from my tea. "I've never measured my happiness in square feet." She smiled. "You know what I mean. I did." She opened her phone and showed me photographs of a condominium development west of Richmond. Everything was white beige polished new. There are elevators, a fitness center, maintenance included. You wouldn't have to worry about the yard. I like my yard. You say that now. I studied her. Melissa, are you trying to sell me a condo? She laughed quickly. No, I'm just thinking ahead. That phrase stayed with me. Thinking ahead. I heard it again 2 weeks later when she mentioned how much property values in my neighborhood had risen. Again when she asked whether I'd ever considered what the house might sell for. Again when she casually mentioned that older homeowners sometimes waited too long to downsize and lost the chance to enjoy the money tied up in their homes. Each time I gave the same answer. I appreciate your concern, but I'm staying. Jason always softened it afterward. She's just trying to help Mom, so I let it go. Until the Tuesday before my trip to Charlottesville. I had been working in the backyard most of the morning. When I came inside, I heard movement in Robert's old office. That room was mostly untouched. His desk was still beneath the window. His drafting lamp still stood in the corner. On the wall hung a framed photograph of Robert holding Jason on his shoulders during a camping trip. Melissa was standing in the middle of the room. She had a tape measure stretched from one wall to the other. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she jumped slightly. "Oh, Dorothy, I didn't hear you. What are you doing?" She looked down at the tape measure. Yes, Melissa, the tape measure." Her smile returned. "I was just curious whether a sectional would fit in here. A sectional Jason mentioned this room could make a beautiful den someday. Someday." There was that kind of word again. Not today. Not with my permission. Someday. I looked around Robert's office. Why would Jason need a sectional in my husband's office? Melissa immediately corrected herself. "I didn't mean Jason needs one. I just meant hypothetically." I held her gaze. Hypothetically. She rolled up the tape measure. "You're reading too much into it." Maybe I was. I wanted to believe that. That evening, I called Jason. "Your wife was measuring your father's office today." There was a short silence. Then he chuckled. Okay, Mom. Melissa measures everything. It's what she does. She said you thought the room would make a good den." Another pause. Maybe I mentioned it once. Why? Because it would. I didn't answer. Jason sighed. "Mom, please don't turn this into something. Melissa is just trying to help." There it was again. Help. Such an innocent word. Such a convenient word. I told Jason goodnight and hung up. Then I walked back into Robert's office. The late afternoon sun stretched across his desk, catching the scratches he'd left in the wood over decades of work. I touched the back of his chair. For the first time since he died, the room didn't feel empty. It felt watched, measured, evaluated. I looked toward the doorway where Melissa had stood with that tape measure, and something uncomfortable settled in my chest. She wasn't looking at my home the way I looked at it. She wasn't seeing Robert's desk, or Jason's childhood photograph, or 36 years of birthdays, arguments, reconciliations, Christmas mornings, illnesses, and ordinary Tuesday nights. She was seeing square footage, potential, equity. I told myself I was being unfair. 3 days later, standing outside that same house with a key that no longer worked, I would remember Melissa stretching that tape measure across Robert's office, and finally understand. She hadn't been measuring a room. She had been measuring the life she expected to have after I was moved out of mine. The trip they wanted me to take. The morning after I found Melissa measuring Robert's office, my daughter Rebecca called from Charlottesville. "Mom, you haven't forgotten Saturday, have you?" I smiled as I carried my coffee to the kitchen table. "My memory still works, Rebecca. I know. I'm checking because Emma has asked me 6 times if Grandma Dorothy is coming." My granddaughter was performing in a school music program that weekend. I had promised her I would be there, though my original plan was simple: drive to Charlottesville Saturday morning, spend the night at Rebecca's house, and come home Sunday afternoon. Rebecca tried to convince me to stay longer. "You never come for more than 1 night. I have a house to take care of. The house will survive without you for 48 hours. At the time, neither of us understood how ironic that sentence would become. That afternoon, Jason and Melissa stopped by. I mentioned the trip while Jason was checking a loose hinge on one of my kitchen cabinets. "I'm leaving Saturday morning," I said. "I'll probably be back Sunday." Melissa looked up immediately. "Sunday, Dorothy, why rush?" Her enthusiasm surprised me. "I'm not rushing. You should stay a few days. Spend time with Rebecca. Enjoy yourself." Jason glanced toward his wife, then back at the cabinet. "Melissa's right, Mom. You haven't gotten away in a while." I leaned against the counter. "You two trying to get rid of me, I meant it as a joke." Melissa laughed. "Of course not." Then she stepped closer. "Actually, if you stay until Tuesday or Wednesday, I can come by and water your plants. I'll bring in the mail too. That won't be necessary. It's no trouble. I'll only be gone a few days." She smiled. "Exactly." There was nothing openly suspicious about the conversation. That was what bothered me. Melissa had spent months suggesting I should leave the house permanently. Now she seemed unusually interested in making sure I stayed away for several days. Still, I told myself not to become paranoid. Jason was my son. Melissa was my daughter-in-law. Families sometimes irritated each other. That didn't mean every awkward comment concealed a plan. Saturday morning, I packed a small suitcase and drove west toward Charlottesville. Rebecca lived in a quiet neighborhood with her husband and 16-year-old daughter, Emma. The moment I arrived, Emma ran outside and hugged me. For several hours, I forgot about Melissa, the tape measure, and that uneasy feeling in Robert's office. Emma's performance was wonderful. Afterward, we went for dinner, and Rebecca convinced me to stay through Monday. "You can leave after breakfast," she said. I agreed. Sunday morning, while Rebecca was making pancakes, my phone vibrated. A notification from my doorbell camera appeared on the screen. Motion detected at front door. I tapped it. The application opened, loaded for several seconds, then displayed device offline. I tried again. Nothing. "Everything okay?" Rebecca asked. "My camera's offline, probably the Wi-Fi." "Probably." I put the phone down. Less than 5 minutes later, it rang. "Jason." "Morning, Mom." "Good morning. How's Charlottesville nice?" We talked briefly about Emma's performance. Then, without me mentioning the camera, Jason said, "By the way, your internet was acting weird." My fingers tightened around the phone. "My internet, yeah. I stopped by earlier. Router needed resetting." I looked toward Rebecca. She noticed my expression. "Why were you at the house?" A pause. "Just checking on things." Melissa said she'd water the plants. She did. I was nearby. I waited. Jason filled the silence. "Everything's fine, Mom." There was that word, fine. "All right," I said. After we hung up, Rebecca set a plate in front of me. "What was that? Jason says my router needed resetting. So he told me before I told him the camera wasn't working." Rebecca stopped. Maybe he knew because he reset it. Maybe. I wanted that explanation to satisfy me. It didn't. About an hour later, another notification appeared. This one was an email. The sender's name included the words Richmond Security and Locksmith. I saw only the subject line on my lock screen, service confirmation. Before I could open it, Emma called from the living room asking me to look at photographs from the night before. I set the phone down. When I returned several minutes later, I opened my email. The message was gone. I searched the inbox. Nothing, trash, nothing, spam, nothing. I typed locksmith into the search bar. No results. A cold feeling moved through me. Rebecca walked into the kitchen. "What happened?" "I received an email from a locksmith." Her face changed. "A locksmith had disappeared." "What do you mean disappeared? I mean it was there and now it isn't." Rebecca immediately reached for her car keys. "We're going back." "No, Mom, not yet." She stared at me. "You think Jason is doing something?" "I don't know what I think. Actually, that wasn't true." I was beginning to think several things I didn't want to say aloud. After Robert died, Jason had helped me organize some of my online accounts. He had set up apps, reset passwords, connected smart home devices. At the time, I had been grateful. Grief makes ordinary tasks feel enormous. I had trusted him, maybe too much. Rebecca sat opposite me. "If you're worried, let me drive you home." I looked at the keys in her hand. Part of me wanted to say yes. I wanted to arrive immediately, walk through my front door, and prove to myself that nothing was wrong. But another part of me, the part that had spent 30 years working with escrow files, title documents, signatures, and people who sometimes told very convenient versions of the truth, told me not to announce myself. If Jason and Melissa were doing something they shouldn't be doing, rushing home after that locksmith notification would only warn them. "No," I repeated. Rebecca frowned. "You're staying until tomorrow." Why I picked up my coffee, although it had gone cold. "Because they think I'm staying until tomorrow." Rebecca understood. She slowly placed her keys back on the counter. That evening, Jason texted me. "Hope you're having fun. Don't rush home. Everything here is handled." I read the message 3 times. "Everything here is handled. Not everything at home is fine. Not your plants are watered. Everything here is handled." I didn't reply. Instead, I went upstairs and packed my suitcase. The next morning, I left Charlottesville earlier than anyone expected. I didn't call Jason. I didn't call Melissa. And I didn't tell them I was coming. For most of the drive back toward Richmond, I argued with myself. Maybe the locksmith email had been spam. Maybe the camera really had failed. Maybe Jason had simply reset my router. Maybe Melissa's measuring tape meant nothing. I wanted every one of those explanations to be true. But when I finally turned onto my street, the first thing I noticed was a vehicle I didn't recognize parked near my driveway. The second was a stack of flattened cardboard boxes beside the garage, and when I walked onto my porch and reached for the key I had carried for 36 years, I discovered exactly what Jason had meant when he said everything was handled. My key no longer fit the lock. My son was standing inside. For a few seconds after Melissa's face changed, neither of us spoke. I stood on the porch with my suitcase beside me, and she stood in the doorway of the house where I had raised my children, buried my husband's ashes beneath the dogwood, and spent 36 years building a life. Then Melissa recovered. "I don't know what you mean." "The deed I repeated, did you read it?" Her mouth tightened. "Dorothy, this doesn't need to become some legal argument." "Interesting. I hadn't said anything about lawyers." I looked past her shoulder. There were more boxes than I had noticed through the glass. One was marked kitchen. Another had my name written across the side in black marker, Dorothy Clothes. My stomach turned. "Where did those come from?" Melissa glanced behind her. "We started organizing. You packed my clothes, only some things. Why?" She folded her arms. "Because somebody had to start making decisions." I stared at her. "About my clothes, about everything." I stepped toward the doorway. Melissa didn't move. That hurt more than I expected. She was physically blocking me from entering my own home. "Move, Dorothy. I really think we should wait for Jason. This is my house, and nobody is saying it isn't. You changed the locks. For safety." I almost laughed. "Whose safety?" Melissa exhaled sharply. "You've been forgetting things. That stopped me. What have I forgotten? Little things. Name one." She hesitated. "That's not the point." "It became the point when you used my supposed memory problems to change my locks." Melissa looked away. I understood immediately. There had been no forgotten keys, no wandering, no incident. She had invented a justification after the fact. "I called Jason," she said. "He's coming." Good. I stepped back. For the next 15 minutes, I waited on the porch. Melissa went inside and closed the door. She closed my door in my face. I sat on the porch bench Robert had installed 22 years earlier and stared at the dogwood tree. I remembered Jason climbing it when he was 11. He had fallen from a low branch and scraped his knee. Robert carried him inside while Jason insisted he wasn't crying. That boy had trusted me to make pain disappear with antiseptic and a Band-Aid. Now I was waiting to see what kind of man that boy had become. Jason's SUV finally pulled into the driveway. He climbed out quickly. "Mom." I stood. "Did you know he slowed?" That was my answer. "Mom, let's talk inside." I looked at the locked door. "I'd love to." His face reddened. "Melissa shouldn't have handled it like this." "Handled what? The door opened behind me." Melissa stepped outside. "Jason, please explain this to her." I kept my eyes on my son. "What exactly are you supposed to explain?" Jason rubbed the back of his neck. It was something he had done since childhood, whenever he didn't want to tell the truth. "We've been worried about you being here alone. I've been alone for 3 years, I know." And he sighed. "Mom, nobody is taking anything from you. We're just getting ahead of what's coming." The words landed harder because I had heard a version of them before. Melissa thinking ahead, Jason getting ahead. Everyone seemed very interested in my future, except me. "What's coming, Jason?" He glanced toward Melissa. She answered for him. "At some point you're going to have to downsize." According to whom? According to reality. I felt anger rise, but I kept my voice level. "I'm 68, Melissa, not 98. "That's not what I meant." "Then explain what you meant." She stepped forward. "This house is too much for one person. Jason and I can maintain it. We can renovate it properly. You could stay with Rebecca until we find you somewhere appropriate." Somewhere appropriate. As though I were a piece of furniture they needed to relocate. "And why would you renovate my house?" Melissa looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because Jason will own it eventually anyway." There it was. Not concern, not safety, ownership. I turned toward Jason. "Is that what you think, Mom? Do you believe this house belongs to you?" "I didn't say that. She did. You're standing beside her. So I'm asking you." He looked down. "I'm your son." That wasn't my question. Silence. I could hear a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Finally, Jason said Dad always said everything would stay in the family. I almost felt sorry for him. Robert had said many things about family. Jason had apparently remembered only the sentence that sounded profitable. "Have you read the deed?" Jason frowned. "The deed, yes. No." "Have you read any of the documents your father and I signed concerning this property?" Melissa interrupted. "Dorothy, everybody knows Jason and Rebecca are your heirs." I turned to her. "Everybody?" She crossed her arms again. That's how inheritance works. I spent almost 30 years as an escrow officer. I had watched people discover that assumptions about property were among the most expensive assumptions a person could make. Melissa worked in real estate. She should have known better. But I wasn't ready to explain anything. Not yet. I wanted to understand how far this had gone. "Where are my bedroom things?" Jason looked uncomfortable. "Mom, please," where Melissa answered. "Some are boxed. Nothing was thrown away. Some, we needed room." For what? Neither answered. I looked through the doorway again. A lamp I had never seen before stood beside my sofa. There were 2 decorative pillows Melissa owned on the couch. This wasn't preparation. They had begun moving in. Something inside me went very still. I picked up the handle of my suitcase. Jason stepped toward me. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere I'm allowed through the door. Mom, don't do this." I looked at him. "I'm not doing anything, Jason." For the first time he had no response. I rolled my suitcase toward the driveway. "Dorothy, Melissa called. We can discuss this when everyone calms down." I stopped but didn't turn around. I am calm. And I was. That seemed to frighten her more than anger would have. I placed my suitcase in the trunk and sat behind the wheel. My hands trembled only after I closed the car door. For one terrible second, I wanted Robert beside me. I wanted him to tell me what to do. Then I remembered something he used to say whenever a problem looked complicated. "Start with what you know." So I did. I knew Melissa had changed my locks. I knew Jason had allowed it. I knew they believed my house was already part of their future, and I knew something they didn't. I took out my phone and called William Harper. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Dorothy, William, I need your help." His voice immediately changed. "What happened?" I looked through the windshield. Jason was standing on the porch, inside my house. "William," I said, "I think it's time we opened Robert's property file." There was a brief silence. Then he said quietly, "I was wondering when that day might come." What Robert knew. William Harper's office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near downtown Richmond, the kind of place Robert had always liked, because nothing about it tried too hard to look expensive. I arrived at 9 the next morning. William was already waiting. At 63, he had more gray hair than when Robert and I first hired him, but the same measured expression that made people lower their voices when they sat across from him. He didn't ask me to explain everything immediately. He poured me coffee, closed his office door, and placed a thick folder on the conference table. Simpson Family Property. Seeing Robert's name beneath mine on the original file label made my throat tighten. William sat opposite me. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told him about Melissa measuring Robert's office, the strange enthusiasm about my Charlottesville trip, the disabled doorbell camera, the locksmith email, the new deadbolt, the boxes, my clothes, and finally Jason standing inside while I stood outside. William didn't interrupt. When I finished, he removed his glasses. "Did either of them show you any legal document authorizing this? No. Did you sign anything? No. Give anyone power of attorney? No." He nodded. "Good." That one word reminded me how much worse the situation could have been. William opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. As soon as I saw Robert's signature, I was taken back 8 years. Jason had been 33 then. He had invested money in a small equipment leasing venture with a friend. Robert had warned him that the numbers looked too optimistic. Jason invested anyway. Within 18 months, the business collapsed. He didn't lose everything, but he lost enough to frighten us. Robert and I helped once. Not enough to erase the consequences, but enough to keep Jason from drowning. Afterward, Robert sat with me at our kitchen table. "He's a good boy," I had said. Robert looked tired. "He's a grown man, Dorothy. He made a mistake." "I know. What worries me is how quickly he looks for someone else to make the mistake disappear. At the time, I thought Robert was being too hard on him. Then Melissa entered Jason's life. I didn't dislike her. In fact, during their first years together, I enjoyed her company. She was energetic, ambitious, polished. But Robert noticed things I dismissed. Whenever we discussed neighborhoods, Melissa asked about property values. When Robert mentioned improvements to the house, she wanted to know how much equity we had gained. Once during Thanksgiving dinner, she jokingly told Jason, "Your parents are sitting on a gold mine." Everyone laughed. Robert didn't. Several weeks later, he asked me to meet William with him. I remembered sitting in the very office where I was now. "Why are we doing this?" I had asked. Robert squeezed my hand. "Because I want everything clear before one of us isn't here to explain it." We had already made wills. This was different. Robert wanted the house structured carefully. He didn't want Jason and Rebecca fighting over it. More importantly, he didn't want either child believing that being named in an estate plan gave them rights while we were still alive. A house should shelter a family, Dorothy Robert had told me afterward. It should never own one. At the time, those words sounded almost overly cautious. Now they felt prophetic. William turned several pages. Robert was very deliberate about this property. I remember. Do Jason or Rebecca know the details? No. Why not? Because there was never a reason for them to. William nodded. That had been intentional too. Our children knew we had an estate plan. They knew both of them were included, but Robert believed inheritance should not become something children calculated while their parents were still living. William pulled out a certified copy of the deed, then another document. I recognized both. My pulse steadied. There it was, the thing Melissa had never bothered to read. William tapped the papers. If what you've told me is accurate, Jason and Melissa have made some very serious assumptions. I know. Do you want me to contact them? Not yet. He studied me. Dorothy, they changed the locks. I'm aware. They boxed your possessions. I'm aware of that, too. Then what are you waiting for? I looked down at Robert's signature. My son. William leaned back. I'm not sure I understand. I need to know whether Jason is confused or whether he has decided that what he expects to inherit matters more than what belongs to me now. Changing the locks suggests Melissa changed them with his knowledge. Yes. The word hurt. But I needed to distinguish between weakness and intention before I made a permanent decision about my son. William knew me well enough not to argue immediately. Finally, he asked, What do you want to do? I want to give Jason a chance to fix it before he knows what these papers say. William's eyebrows rose slightly. You don't want him to know. Not yet. Why? Because if Jason changes his behavior only after discovering he has no legal leverage, then I haven't learned whether he respects me. I've only learned that he understands paperwork. William was silent. Then he gave a small nod. That sounds like something Robert would say. I smiled despite myself. No, Robert would use fewer words. William laughed softly. For the first time since I found the new lock, I felt like I could breathe. Then he became serious again. There is something else you need to consider. What if they're treating the property as though it already belongs to Jason? Changing locks may not be the end of it. I looked at him. What else could they do? That depends on what they believe they own. The sentence chilled me. William slid the certified deed toward me. Legally, their belief doesn't change reality, but practically people can create enormous problems when they act on assumptions. I thought about Melissa measuring the office, the moving boxes, the unfamiliar lamp. The words she had used. Jason will own this house eventually anyway. What exactly are you worried about? William didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed one hand over the property file. I think we should find out what Melissa has been doing before we show her what she missed. I nodded. Do it. He gathered the papers but left the deed in front of me. For a moment, I ran my fingers over Robert's signature. 8 years earlier, I had thought my husband was protecting a house. Now I understood. He had been protecting me. And somewhere inside my home, Melissa and Jason were making plans based on a future they believed had already been promised to them. They had no idea Robert had planned for that too. She started renovating my life. I checked into a hotel near Short Pump that afternoon. Rebecca hated the idea. You have a perfectly good room here, she said over the phone. Come back to Charlottesville. I know. Then why are you paying for a hotel 20 minutes from your own house? Because I needed to stay close. Because I wanted to see what Jason and Melissa would do when they thought I had surrendered. But mostly because I didn't want Rebecca fighting my battle for me. This is between me and your brother, I said. He locked you out. Melissa changed the locks, and Jason let her. I closed my eyes. Yes, Rebecca went quiet. Mom, stop protecting him. I'm not protecting him. I'm giving him enough room to show me who he is. The next morning, my phone rang before 8. It was Evelyn Brooks, my neighbor from across the street. Evelyn had lived there for 23 years. She had brought casseroles when Robert died and sat beside me at his memorial service. Dorothy, she said, are you moving? I sat upright. Why would you ask that? There was a pause. Melissa told me you decided to downsize. My hand tightened around the phone. When yesterday, I saw a moving truck. My heart began pounding. She said you were staying with Rebecca while they got the house ready. Ready for what? She didn't say. I got dressed immediately. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I called William. He answered from his car. I was about to call you. What happened? I made a few inquiries. And Melissa has been asking questions about financing. I stopped beside my hotel window. What kind of financing? Home equity financing. Possibly a renovation loan. For a moment, I couldn't speak. She can't do that. No, but she may not understand that yet. She works in real estate. Selling houses doesn't make someone an expert in title law. I stared at the traffic below. Why would she need financing? My guess? She thinks improving the property now will increase whatever equity Jason eventually receives. That wasn't enough. Melissa didn't spend money without expecting a return. Keep looking, I said. I will. I drove home. I parked half a block away. A moving truck sat in my driveway. 2 men carried boxes through my front door while Melissa stood near the garage giving directions. I remained in my car. 1 box came out, then another. My books. A lamp from the upstairs hallway. 2 framed photographs. I felt as though I were watching strangers dismantle a museum dedicated to my own life. Then Evelyn walked toward my car. She opened the passenger door. I knew you hadn't agreed to this. No, I'm sorry. What did Melissa tell everyone that you finally accepted the house was too much? Finally, as though I had been resisting some inevitable truth. Evelyn hesitated. There's something else. What? Yesterday she had a contractor here. I looked at her. He was taking pictures. Measurements. Robert's office flashed through my mind. What are they planning? I heard her talking about opening up the downstairs. My stomach turned. The downstairs contained Robert's office. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. If I walked inside now, Melissa would argue. Jason would arrive. Everyone would talk around the truth again. I needed facts, so I waited. An hour later, William called. His voice was grim. You were right to be concerned. Tell me, Melissa has been discussing a small investment project with a lender. 2 properties from what I can determine. She appears to believe your house could provide collateral or equity support. I almost laughed from disbelief. She wants to use my house to buy other houses. She wants to explore it. Whether she could ever actually complete the financing is another matter. And Jason, I can't tell how much he understands. I could. Enough, maybe not every detail, but enough to let his wife change my locks. Enough to let movers enter my home. Enough to stand inside while I stood outside. That afternoon, Evelyn called again. This time her voice sounded different. Dorothy, you should come. What happened? It's Robert's chair. Everything inside me stopped. What chair? The wooden one from his office. The one he made. Robert had built that chair during our 25th year of marriage. It wasn't elegant. One leg was slightly uneven, and I used to tease him that a civil engineer should know how to make 4 pieces of wood the same length. After he died, I left it beside his desk. Where is it? By the trash. I drove home. This time I pulled directly into the driveway. The moving truck was gone. The chair sat beside several garbage bags near the curb. For a moment, I couldn't get out of the car. It wasn't valuable, maybe $50 at a yard sale, but Robert's hands had shaped the arms. His initials were carved beneath the seat, and someone had decided it was garbage. I walked over and lifted it. My back protested, but I refused to put it down. As I carried it toward my trunk, movement caught my eye. Jason stood behind the living room window. Our eyes met. He saw the chair in my hands. He saw me struggling with it. I waited. Some foolish part of me expected the front door to open, expected my son to run outside, expected him to say, "Mom, stop. This has gone too far." He didn't. Jason remained behind the glass. I managed to fit the chair into my trunk. Then I looked back. He was still there. For the first time since this began, I stopped thinking of Melissa as the whole problem. She was ambitious. She was presumptuous. She had crossed boundaries no decent person should cross. But Jason was my son. He knew what that chair meant. He knew what that house meant, and he was choosing silence. I closed the trunk. Jason disappeared from the window. I stood beside my car staring at the house Robert and I had built together. Until then, I had kept telling myself Jason was being manipulated, that Melissa was pushing and Jason was simply too weak to stop her. But weakness has consequences too. Silence becomes a decision when you have enough time to speak. My phone rang. William. I found something else, he said. What the lender contact went further than I thought. Melissa has been asking what documentation would be required to leverage the property. I looked at the new lock on my front door. Then I think she's ready for an answer. William paused. Are you sure I looked at Robert's chair through the rear window of my car? Yes, I had given them silence. I had given them time. Now I was going to give them the one thing Melissa should have asked for before she touched my home. The truth about who actually owned it. The deed Melissa never read. The next morning I sat across from William Harper for the second time in 3 days. This time I wasn't confused. I wasn't hoping the situation would somehow explain itself. I was angry. But anger I had learned during nearly 30 years working in escrow was most useful when you didn't let it make decisions for you. William placed a fresh cup of coffee beside me. You're certain, yes. You understand that once Jason learns how the property is structured, the conversation changes. That's why I want to understand every detail before he does. William nodded and opened the Simpson property file. He placed the certified deed on the table. Then he placed a second document beside it, the Simpson Family Residence Trust. Seeing the title brought back a memory of Robert sitting beside me in that same office 8 years earlier. He had held my hand while William explained the arrangement. At the time, it had seemed like responsible estate planning. Now it felt like a message from my husband. William turned the deed toward me. Let's go through it again. I remember most of it, I know, but right now, details matter. He pointed to the relevant language. 8 years earlier, Robert and I had transferred title to our home into the Simpson Family Residence Trust. We had done it deliberately, not to hide anything, not to cheat anyone. We wanted the house managed according to clear instructions if one of us died or became unable to handle our affairs. While Robert was alive, we managed those decisions together. After his death, the structure changed exactly as the documents required. William looked at me. You are now the sole acting trustee, I know, and the sole lifetime beneficiary. I nodded, which means he smiled slightly. You tell me. You were an escrow officer. Despite everything, I smiled back. It means Jason doesn't own my house. Correct. Rebecca doesn't own it either. Correct. And Melissa certainly doesn't. Very correct. I looked down at the documents. Jason and Rebecca were named in the trust, but not in the way Melissa apparently imagined. They were contingent remainder beneficiaries. Their interests were future interests subject to the terms of the trust. They did not have present ownership. They could not walk into my house and claim a bedroom because they expected to inherit something someday. They could not sell the property. They could not pledge it as collateral. They could not mortgage it. And they could not decide that my right to live there had somehow expired because I was 68. William tapped another section. This is important. I read it. The trust gave me exclusive occupancy rights during my lifetime. More than that, while I remained competent, I retained broad authority as trustee over the property. The trust could also be amended or revoked under the powers Robert and I had deliberately preserved. In other words, Jason's future interest was not a promise carved in stone. It was conditional, and it was mine to reconsider. I leaned back. Does Melissa have any legal basis whatsoever for what she's doing? No changing the locks? No. Moving my belongings? No. Talking to lenders? She can talk to anyone she likes. She cannot create an ownership interest by talking. What if Jason signs something? William shook his head. He cannot give away rights he does not possess. That sentence almost made me laugh. Not because anything was funny, because Melissa had spent months talking about equity renovations and the future, while apparently skipping the first question any competent real estate professional should ask. Who holds title? She never checked, I said, apparently not carefully enough. She sells houses for a living. William removed his glasses. Dorothy, people often become careless when they think they already know the answer. I stared at the deed. That was exactly what had happened. Melissa had looked at an elderly widow living alone in a valuable house. She saw a husband who was dead, a son who would inherit, a property she believed was waiting for the next generation. Then she built an entire plan on that assumption, and Jason had let her. So they locked the trustee out of her own trust property. William's expression hardened. That's exactly what they did. I shook my head slowly. Robert would have been furious, not loud. He was rarely loud. Robert's anger became quieter as it became more serious. I could almost hear him. Let them finish talking, Dorothy. People tell you a lot when they think they're winning. William gathered several documents. I can send formal notice today. Not yet. He stopped. Dorothy, I'm not letting this continue indefinitely. Then what are you waiting for, Jason? William sighed. You're still trying to separate him from Melissa. No. That surprised even me. 2 days earlier, perhaps I had been. Not anymore. I had seen Jason behind the window while I carried Robert's chair to my car. He had made his choice, but I needed to know whether he could recognize it. I want to give him one opportunity to undo what he helped do. Before you tell him about the trust, yes. William studied me. Why? Because once Jason learns he has no present ownership, fixing this becomes easy. I'm not following. If he gives me back my home because a lawyer tells him he has no choice, that tells me nothing. William became quiet. I continued. I want to know what my son does while he still believes he has something to gain. Understanding crossed William's face. You want him to choose you before he knows the consequences. Yes, that was exactly it. This had stopped being a dispute over property. It was a test of character, and Jason didn't even know he was taking it. I asked William for copies of the deed and trust certification. He slid them into a folder. Before I left, he said, "Dorothy, there's one more thing." I turned. "As trustee, you're not required to preserve Jason's future role simply because that was the original plan." I knew what he meant. Jason had not only been named as a future beneficiary. Under our original documents, he had also been given an important responsibility if I could no longer manage the trust myself. For the first time, I wondered whether Robert and I had trusted the wrong child with that responsibility. "Not yet," I said. William nodded. "But you're considering it." I picked up the folder. "I'm considering everything." Outside, I sat in my car without starting the engine. Then I called Jason. He answered after 4 rings. "Mom, we need to talk." "Okay, just you and me." A pause. "Melissa should probably know." My voice stopped him. "Tomorrow, noon, Miller's Diner." The diner Robert used to take him to when he was a boy. Jason finally said, "All right." I ended the call. The folder containing the truth rested on the passenger seat, but tomorrow I wasn't bringing it. Before Jason learned what the deed said, I wanted to hear what his conscience said, and I was going to give my son exactly one chance to choose between them. I gave my son one chance. Miller's Diner hadn't changed much in 30 years. The red vinyl booths were cracked in the corners, the coffee was still stronger than it needed to be, and a little brass bell still rang above the entrance whenever someone walked inside. Robert used to bring Jason there on Saturday mornings. When Jason was 8, he ordered chocolate chip pancakes. When he was 16, he pretended he was too old to have breakfast with his father. When he was 25, he started asking Robert to meet him there again. I chose that diner deliberately. I wanted my son to remember who he had been before houses, debt, inheritance, and fear had become part of the conversation. Jason arrived 7 minutes late. He slid into the booth across from me. "You look tired, Mom. So do you." A waitress poured him coffee. Neither of us spoke until she walked away. Then Jason looked around. "Why hear your father like this place?" His expression softened. "Yeah," I waited. Jason finally sighed. "Mom, I know you're upset." "That's an interesting word. What word, upset?" He rubbed his hands together. "What do you want me to call it? Locked out." His eyes dropped. There it was. Shame. Not enough yet. But it was there. I had deliberately left William's folder at the hotel. No deed, no trust certification, no lawyer. I wanted nothing on that table except the truth. "Do you believe what Melissa did was right?" Jason looked toward the window. "She went too far." "That wasn't my question." "I just said you said she went too far. I asked whether she was wrong." He took a breath. "Yes." The answer should have comforted me. It didn't. "Then why haven't you changed the locks back?" "Because it's complicated." "No, Jason. Locks are remarkably simple." His jaw tightened. "Mom, did I ask you to manage my life? No. Did I ask Melissa to pack my clothes? No. Did I ask either of you to renovate my house? No. Did I give you my house?" His eyes lifted to mine. "No." I leaned forward. "Then why were you standing inside while I was standing outside?" He froze. For several seconds I saw the little boy Robert used to bring here. Then the adult returned. "Melissa thought we needed to make a decision. You know what I mean." "No, I don't." Jason lowered his voice. "You're 68, I'm aware. That house is a lot. For whom? For one person. Your father died, Jason. I didn't." His face changed. "I didn't mean it like that. But that's how you've been behaving." He stared into his coffee. I let the silence work. Eventually, Jason spoke. "We're under pressure." "What kind of pressure? Financial?" I already knew enough from William not to be surprised, but I wanted Jason's version. "Melissa has some investment plans," he continued, "and I've had some things come up too, so you decided my house could solve them." "No." "Then explain the movers." He flinched. "Melissa thinks putting money into the property now makes sense." "For whom?" "For everybody." I almost laughed. "How does packing my clothes benefit me?" "That part wasn't supposed to happen like that." "Which part was supposed to happen, Jason?" He had no answer. I studied him. "Did Melissa tell you this house would eventually belong to you?" He hesitated. "Yes, and you believed her. I mean, you and Dad always said Rebecca and I would be taken care of." "Being taken care of and owning my home while I'm alive are very different things." "I know." "Do you?" He looked away. Then he said something that explained more than he intended. "We thought if we improved it now, we'd be building equity instead of wasting time." "Wasting time, my years. My life in that house had somehow become a waiting period before their investment began." I felt anger rise, but beneath it was grief. "Jason, listen to yourself." He closed his eyes. "I know how it sounds." "No, I don't think you do." He looked at me again. I softened my voice. "I'm going to give you one chance." His expression sharpened. "To do what? Fix this. How? You know how." I counted the conditions on my fingers. First, I get access to my house again, immediately. He nodded slowly. Second, everything Melissa moved or packed gets put back where it was. Okay. Third, every item belonging to you or Melissa that was moved into my house leaves. Jason swallowed. And fourth, you tell your wife that what you did was wrong. His face tightened. Mom, no. I can get you a key today. That isn't what I said. Why does Melissa have to leave? Because she locked me out of my own house. She was trying to careful. He stopped. Do not call what she did helping. Jason stared at me. What happens if I do all that? I almost couldn't believe the question. Then we begin repairing what you broke. And if I don't? There it was. The question that told me he still thought this was a negotiation. I leaned back. Then I'll know what I needed to know. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you have 48 hours. 48 hours, return my access. Restore my belongings, remove yours. Admit what happened. He looked frustrated. You're giving me an ultimatum. No, Jason. An ultimatum tries to control what someone does. I'm giving you a choice so I can understand who you are. He stared at me for a long time, then his expression changed. Suspicion. Have you talked to a lawyer? I felt something inside me go cold. Why would that matter? Because you're talking like what? He stopped. I waited. Jason shook his head. Nothing. He reached for his coffee. I suddenly understood that even now part of him was calculating. What could I do? What could he lose? How serious was I? I stood. Jason looked up. That's it. That's it. Mom, wait. I put on my coat. 48 hours, Jason. He glanced toward the empty seat beside me. Is Rebecca involved? No. Did she tell you to do this? No. Then who are you listening to? That question almost broke my heart. Myself. I reached into my purse and placed money beside my untouched coffee. Jason looked smaller somehow. Mom. I paused. What? He opened his mouth. For one hopeful second, I thought he would apologize. Instead, he said, I need time to talk to Melissa. I nodded. Now you have it. Outside, the Virginia air was cold and sharp. I sat in my car and looked through the diner window. Jason remained alone in the booth where his father had once taught him how to cut pancakes with a fork. William's folder was back at my hotel. Jason still didn't know about the trust. He still believed the house would eventually be his. That was exactly why the next 48 hours mattered. If my son chose me now, I would know there was still something worth rebuilding. If he chose the house he thought he was going to inherit, I would know something else. And this time, I wouldn't look away from the answer. 48 hours. The first hour was the hardest. I returned to my hotel after leaving Jason at Miller's Diner and placed my phone on the small desk beside the window. Then I waited. Part of me expected him to call before I had even taken off my coat. He didn't. I told myself that was reasonable. Jason needed to speak to Melissa. He needed to explain that they had crossed a line. Maybe he needed an hour, maybe two. At 3:17 that afternoon, my phone finally lit up. A text from Jason. Working things out. Please give me a little time. I read it twice. Working things out. There was something deeply wrong with those words. What was there to work out? It was my house, my belongings, my key. There should have been nothing to negotiate. Still, I answered with only 4 words. You have 48 hours. Then I put the phone down. That evening, Rebecca called. Have you talked to Jason? Yes. And I gave him 2 days to fix it. 2 days, yes. Mom, why are you still giving him chances? I looked through the hotel window at the lights along Broad Street. Because after this, I don't want to wonder whether I acted too quickly. Rebecca was quiet. You're still protecting him. No. I had finally understood the difference. I'm protecting myself from regret. The next morning there was no call, no message. I drove past my house shortly after 9. I didn't stop. Melissa's car was in the driveway. So was Jason's. The new lock remained on the door. Several boxes were visible through the front window. Nothing had changed. At noon, Jason texted again. Melissa is upset. I'm trying to keep this from becoming a bigger family fight. I stared at the message until anger replaced disappointment. A bigger family fight, as though the problem was everyone's reaction rather than what he and Melissa had done. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed another. Finally, I sent returning my home is not a family negotiation. He didn't answer. That afternoon, William called. Any progress? Number, how much time remains? 22 hours. And you're going to wait? Yes, he sighed. I prepared the notice anyway. Good. Dorothy, I also drafted the trust amendment we discussed. My stomach tightened. Don't finalize it yet. I won't. I knew what changing that document meant. Under the plan Robert and I created years ago, Jason had been named successor trustee if I died or became unable to manage the trust. At the time, it had seemed natural. He was our son. He lived closer than Rebecca. We trusted him. But trust wasn't something a signature could preserve after behavior destroyed it. I still hoped I wouldn't need to change anything. That hope survived until the next morning. At 9:12, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "May I speak with Dorothy Simpson?" "This is Dorothy. My name is Karen. I'm calling regarding a property inquiry connected to an address in Henrico County." Every muscle in my body tightened. She gave my address. "What inquiry?" There was a brief pause. "I'm verifying ownership information associated with a potential financing request." I closed my eyes. Melissa. Even after everything. Even after Jason knew I had given him 48 hours. The financing discussions were continuing. "I have not authorized any financing involving that property," I said. The woman's tone immediately became more careful. "Thank you. I'll make a note of that." After the call ended, I sat completely still. My sadness changed shape. Until then, I had been waiting for Jason to stop Melissa. Now I understood. He wasn't failing to stop her. He was choosing not to. My phone rang again. "Rebecca," I answered. "Mom?" I didn't speak quickly enough. What happened? I told her about the lender. Rebecca exploded. "That's it. I'm driving to Richmond." "No, I'm serious. So am I. Jason needs someone to tell him exactly what kind of man he's becoming. He already has someone." "Who, me?" Rebecca fell silent. I told him what he needed to do. He understood. "Then let me know, sweetheart." My voice softened. "I don't need you to fight your brother for me. He deserves it." "Maybe, but if you fight him, he'll spend the next 10 years telling himself this became a war between you and Melissa. What are you going to do?" I looked at the clock. 34 minutes remained. I'm going to let the clock run out. At noon exactly, I sat beside my phone. No call, no apology, no key. At 12:01, something inside me became calm, not numb, clear. I called William. He answered immediately. "Dorothy, the 48 hours are over." I assumed. "Prepare the notice. It's already prepared. I want Jason and Melissa formally notified that they must remove themselves and their belongings from the property." "All right." And William, "Yes. Finish the amendment." There was silence. "You're certain?" I looked at the photograph of Jason on my phone. It had been taken at his 40th birthday. His arm was around me, both of us smiling. I loved the man in that photograph. I loved him even now. But love did not qualify someone to control my life. "Yes, I'll have it ready this afternoon." When I arrived at William's office, the amendment was waiting. He explained every provision before I signed. I listened carefully. Then I picked up the pen. For one moment, my hand hovered over the paper. I thought about Robert, about the decision we had made years earlier, about the faith we had placed in our son. Then I thought about Jason standing behind the window while I carried Robert's chair away from the trash. I signed. William looked at me. "How do you feel?" I put the pen down. "Sad, not angry, that too." I closed the folder. "But this isn't revenge." William nodded. "No, it's consequence." For the first time in 48 hours, I stopped waiting for my son to make a decision. He already had. Now I had made mine. The next morning, William would come with me to the house. Melissa believed she had changed the locks. Jason believed he was protecting his future inheritance. Neither of them knew that while they had been deciding what to do with my home I had just changed, who would ever be trusted to control it. This is my husband's house. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I pulled into my driveway with William Harper sitting beside me. A licensed locksmith followed in a white van. I had imagined that moment all night. I thought I might feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. The house looked exactly as it always had from the street. Red brick, white shutters, the dogwood Robert and I had planted decades earlier. Only the lock was different. William glanced at me. "Ready?" "Yes." We walked to the porch. I rang the doorbell. It felt ridiculous to ring the bell of my own home. Melissa opened the door. Her expression changed when she saw William. Then she noticed the locksmith. "What is this? I'm coming home," I said. "Dorothy, you can't just show up with." William stepped forward. "William Harper. I represent Mrs. Simpson regarding the property." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "We don't need a lawyer." William remained calm. "That depends entirely on what you've been doing." Jason appeared behind her. "Mom!" I looked at him. The 48 hours had passed without a single meaningful action. "No key," I said. His shoulders dropped. "I was going to call." "When today?" "After the deadline." "Mom, Melissa and I have been trying to figure this out." Melissa turned sharply. "Stop talking like we did something criminal." I looked at her. "You changed the locks on a house you don't own. This is my husband's house, too." William's expression barely moved. On what basis? Melissa stared at him. Excuse me, what document gives your husband a present ownership interest in this property? Her confidence returned. His father owned this house. So did Mrs. Simpson. And Jason is their son. William nodded. That establishes a family relationship, not title. Melissa folded her arms. Jason is an heir. Potential inheritance is not current ownership. She disappeared into the living room and returned with a folder. I'm not stupid. I didn't say you were. She pulled out a photocopy. I've seen the property records. William accepted the page. He examined it for several seconds. This is old. It shows Robert and Dorothy owned the property. Years ago, yes. Melissa frowned. What does that mean? William opened his briefcase. That was the moment I had been waiting for since I asked Melissa the question on the porch. Did you read the deed? William placed a certified copy on the entry table. Melissa leaned toward it. Jason came closer. William pointed to the transfer language. This deed reflects the conveyance of the property into the Simpson Family Residence Trust. Melissa stared at the page. What trust? The trust that holds title. Her face lost color. Jason looked at me. Mom, I said nothing. William placed the trust certification beside the deed. Following Robert Simpson's death, Dorothy Simpson became the sole acting trustee under the governing terms. Jason picked up the document. His eyes moved down the page, then stopped. I knew exactly what he was reading. Trustee Dorothy Simpson. Melissa reached for the paper. That doesn't mean Jason has no interest. William nodded. He and his sister are identified as contingent remainder beneficiaries. Melissa seized on the word. Beneficiaries, exactly. Future beneficiaries, William corrected. That is not the same as being a current owner. She looked confused. William continued. Mrs. Simpson is the sole lifetime beneficiary. She has exclusive occupancy rights under the trust. Jason lowered the document. So I don't own any part of the house? No. Melissa looked at him. You told me this house was yours. Jason's face reddened. I said it would be someday. You said your parents left it to you. I said Rebecca and I were supposed to inherit. Melissa turned back to William. But if Jason is a beneficiary, we can still improve the property, not without the trustee's authorization. What about financing? William's voice became colder. What financing? Melissa immediately realized her mistake. I answered for her. The lender you contacted? Jason looked at Melissa. You actually submitted something. I made inquiries. You said you were only checking options. That's what an inquiry is. William stepped between the argument and the documents. Let me make this simple. Mr. Simpson cannot mortgage this property. He cannot pledge it as collateral. He cannot transfer title. He cannot authorize renovations on behalf of the trust. Melissa's voice sharpened. He's her son. William looked directly at her. Again, that is a relationship. It is not a property right. Silence filled the hallway. For months, Melissa had spoken about my house as though the future had already happened. Now the future she had constructed was collapsing on a small entry table. She looked at me. You knew. Yes, you knew this whole time. I knew how my house was titled. Then why didn't you tell us? I almost couldn't believe the question. Why didn't you ask? Melissa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I stepped toward the table. You measured Robert's office. She looked away. You packed my clothes. No response. You brought movers into my home. You changed my locks. You contacted a lender. I thought Jason... That's the problem. My voice remained quiet. You thought. I turned to my son. Jason looked devastated, but I wasn't finished. You thought because your father died, this house had already started becoming yours. Mom? No. Yes. I never wanted you thrown out. You stood inside while I was outside. His face tightened. I pointed toward the deed. You never read it. Then I looked at Melissa, and neither did you. Melissa's eyes filled with anger. So what now? You throw your own son out. William started to speak, but I raised my hand. This answer belonged to me. I gave Jason 48 hours. Melissa looked at him. What is she talking about? Jason didn't answer. I gave him the opportunity to return my key, restore my belongings, remove yours, and tell you this was wrong. Melissa stared at her husband. You didn't tell me that. Jason whispered. I was trying to handle it. I felt something inside me settle. That phrase again. Handle it. My life had become something everyone wanted to handle. I walked to the door and touched the new deadbolt. Then I faced them. You made plans for this house because you believed someday it would belong to you. Neither spoke. You treated my life like the waiting room before your inheritance. Jason's eyes filled. Mom, I looked directly at him. That was your mistake. Then at Melissa. You started spending my inheritance while I was still alive. The room went silent. William closed the property folder. Melissa finally understood that the lock she had installed had never given her control. Jason finally understood that being someone's son did not make him an owner. But neither of them yet understood the most important consequence of those 48 hours. The deed on the table explained who controlled my house. The document still inside William's briefcase would explain who I no longer trusted to control it after me. The second envelope. For several seconds after I told them they had started spending my inheritance while I was still alive, nobody moved. Melissa was the first to recover. This has gotten completely out of proportion. I looked at her. Has it? Yes. She gestured toward William the locksmith, the documents spread across the entry table. We were trying to help you. I had heard that word so many times that it barely sounded like English anymore. Help! I pointed toward the boxes in my living room. Which box is the helpful one? Melissa, the one with my clothes in it. Her lips tightened. That isn't fair. Was changing my lock fair? We were concerned about you living alone. Then why did your concern require a lender? She froze. Why did it require movers? No answer. Why did it require measuring Robert's office? Jason looked at Melissa. You measured Dad's office. She turned toward him. Don't start acting surprised now. I didn't know you were measuring rooms. You knew we were planning renovations. Planning, not moving Mom out immediately. Their voices rose. William remained silent beside me. I understood why. They were finally telling each other the truth. Melissa pointed at Jason. You told me she'd move eventually. I said we'd talk to her. You said this house would solve everything. Jason glanced at me, his face drained. Melissa, what now? You want to pretend you didn't say it? Stop? No. You let me make all these plans because you thought the house was coming to you. I watched my son close his eyes. That accusation hurt him because it was true. William reached into his briefcase. Mrs. Simpson, I think this is the appropriate time. Jason opened his eyes. For what, William removed a sealed envelope. Melissa stared at it. What now? I took the envelope from him. For a moment I held it in both hands. It wasn't heavy, a few sheets of paper. That was all. Yet those pages represented a decision I had prayed I would never have to make. Jason, I said, your father and I didn't only decide what would eventually happen to this house. He looked at me carefully. We also decided who we trusted to manage things if I ever became unable to do it myself. His expression changed. He remembered. Years earlier, Robert had told him he had an important role in our estate plan. Jason had never asked for details. Perhaps he had assumed that role meant ownership too. William opened the envelope and placed the amendment on the table. Under the previous terms, he explained Jason Simpson was designated as successor trustee. Melissa immediately looked at Jason. What does that mean? Jason answered quietly. If Mom couldn't manage the trust anymore, I would. Correct, William said. Melissa looked relieved for half a second. Then she noticed my face. Would I? Repeated. Jason stared at me. What did you do? I hated the fear in his voice. But consequences only work when they are real. I changed it. He looked down at the amendment. William explained. Mrs. Simpson exercised her authority to amend the trust. Jason is no longer designated as successor trustee. Jason swallowed. Who is Rebecca Carter? His head snapped toward me. Rebecca. Yes. You put Rebecca in charge if I become unable to manage it myself, yes. His voice rose. You don't trust me anymore. The question was so simple, so painful. I looked at the man I had carried as a baby, the boy whose fever had kept me awake all night when he was 6, the teenager whose first car Robert and I helped him buy, the grown man I had once believed would protect me if I ever became vulnerable. I trusted you with a key, I said. You used it to lock me out. Jason's face crumpled. I didn't change the lock. No, Melissa made the call. I stepped closer. But you knew. He looked down. You allowed it. Mom, you stood inside afterward. I didn't know what to do. Yes, you did. My voice remained calm. That's what hurts. He shook his head. You're punishing me for something she did. Melissa turned sharply. Oh, now it's all me. I didn't say that. You just did. Their marriage was cracking in front of me, but I refused to let their argument become an escape route for Jason. This isn't about choosing between you and Melissa, I said. Jason looked at me. It feels like it. No, I am not removing you as successor trustee because of whom you married. I touched the amendment. I'm doing it because you showed me what happens when someone pressures you about my property. He went silent. If I had actually been confused, I continued. If I had truly become vulnerable, you were supposed to be the person protecting my interests. Jason's eyes filled with tears. Instead, when I was perfectly capable of speaking for myself, you helped someone take control away from me. I never wanted to hurt you. I believe that. He looked surprised. But intention is not the same as action. Melissa scoffed. So Rebecca gets everything now. No, William answered before I could. This amendment concerns successor trusteeship, not final distribution. Melissa frowned. So Jason is still a beneficiary. I looked at her. The fact that she asked so quickly told me everything. Jason noticed too. Melissa, what I'm asking, that's enough. For the first time since I arrived, there was genuine anger in his voice toward her. But I felt no satisfaction. This wasn't about winning. It was about seeing clearly. Jason turned back to me. Am I still in the trust? I held his gaze. That isn't the question you should be asking today. His face reddened with shame. You're right. That surprised me. Melissa stared at him. Jason, seriously? He ignored her. I messed up. I wanted those words to repair something. They didn't. Not yet. William gathered the documents. The notice also requires that unauthorized occupants and their belongings be removed from the property. Melissa laughed bitterly. Unauthorized occupants. Nice. You locked the authorized occupant outside, William said. She had no answer. Jason sat down on one of the boxes. He looked exhausted. What happens now? Now I said you both leave my house. He looked toward me. And us? That question was harder. I loved my son. Nothing written in a trust could erase that. But love wasn't permission to pretend the previous week had never happened. I don't know yet. His eyes lowered. I walked toward Robert's photograph and turned it face up. Dust had collected on the glass. I wiped it gently with my sleeve. Behind me, Jason whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I believed he was sorry, but sometimes people are sorry because they finally see the pain they caused, and sometimes they are sorry because they finally see what their choices cost them. I didn't yet know which kind of apology my son was giving me. That answer would take longer than 48 hours. And for the first time in my life, I was willing to wait without rescuing him from the consequences. What my son hadn't told me. Melissa stared at Jason as though he had betrayed her. Maybe in her mind he had, not by changing the locks, not by letting movers into my house, but by finally saying the one thing she didn't want to hear. I messed up. She laughed once sharply. That's convenient. Jason lifted his head. What is? Now that your mother has a lawyer standing here and you've found out the house isn't yours, suddenly you're sorry. Melissa, stop. No. She pointed toward the trust documents. You told me this house would solve everything. The room became silent. I looked at my son. Jason's face changed. Melissa, you did. I said someday. You said one day this place will solve everything. More than once. I felt those words settle inside me, not because I cared about the money, because I suddenly understood that Jason's thinking had begun long before the new lock appeared on my door. How long? I asked. Jason looked at me. Mom, it wasn't like that. How long have you been counting on this house? I wasn't counting on it. Melissa scoffed. Really, Jason stood. Would you please stop helping? I'm the only person telling the truth now. I raised my hand. Enough. They both stopped. I looked at Jason. Tell me what's going on. He rubbed his face. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he sat back down. We have debt. How much? His eyes shifted toward Melissa. That isn't her business, Melissa said. Jason answered anyway. Enough. That's not a number. I know. I waited. He swallowed. Melissa invested in a property deal last year. Melissa folded her arms. It wasn't just me. I didn't say it was. Jason looked at me again. The renovation costs went higher than expected. The property didn't sell when we thought it would. And I had some expenses at work. I used credit to cover things at home. Melissa cut in. You agreed to all of it, I know. The defensiveness disappeared from Jason's voice. That mattered. He was finally beginning to speak without looking for someone else to blame. We kept thinking we could catch up, he continued. Then interest rates changed. Another deal fell apart. I understood. Not every detail. Enough. You were in trouble, yes, and you didn't tell me. No. Why? His answer came quietly. Because I was embarrassed. I looked at him. You could have asked me for advice. I didn't want advice. There was painful honesty in that sentence. What did you want? He stared at the floor. A way out. Melissa stepped forward. And your house was sitting here with all that equity while you were living alone. There it was again, that cold calculation. I turned toward her. My house wasn't sitting anywhere. I was living in it. You know what I mean. Yes, Melissa, I finally do. She shook her head. We weren't trying to steal anything. We were trying to make the property work for the family. Without asking the person who controlled it, you would have said no. Yes. She blinked. At least you admit it. Why wouldn't I? I stepped closer. Your debt is not my mortgage. Melissa's expression hardened. Jason is your son. He is, so you're just going to watch him struggle. That question might have worked on me once. For years, motherhood had trained me to believe that if one of my children was hurting, I should remove the pain. Robert had understood the danger in that better than I had. I looked at Jason. Do you want me to pay your debts? His eyes lifted immediately. No. Melissa stared at him. Jason, no, he repeated. For the first time, he sounded certain. I got us into this too. Mom shouldn't have to fix it. Something inside me softened, not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to notice. Melissa shook her head. This is unbelievable. No, Jason said. What's unbelievable is that we changed the locks on my mother's house. You agreed to it, I know, and now you're acting like I forced you. I'm not. His voice broke slightly. That's the point. He looked at me. I knew. I didn't move. I knew she was changing the locks. I knew she was packing things. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself you'd be safer with Rebecca and that eventually you'd understand. He paused. But mostly I told myself that because it made what we were doing easier. My eyes burned. Jason continued. When I saw you outside with Dad's chair, his voice failed. He looked toward Robert's photograph. I should have come out. Yes, I wanted to, but you didn't. No. Melissa grabbed her purse from a chair. I'm not standing here while everyone pretends Jason is some victim who suddenly found a conscience. Nobody said he was a victim, I replied. She looked at me. In fact, that's the first thing we agree on. Jason flinched, but he didn't argue. I pointed toward the stairs. Pack your things. Melissa laughed. You're serious. Completely. And where are we supposed to go? That is something two capable adults will have to decide. She looked at Jason. Say something. He stood slowly. She's right. Melissa stared at him. You're choosing her. Jason shook his head. This isn't about choosing. It absolutely is. No, it's about leaving a house that was never ours. Melissa's face went cold. She walked upstairs without another word. For the next hour, the house filled with the sounds of drawers opening, footsteps, boxes sliding across floors. William left after confirming the legal paperwork. I remained downstairs. Eventually, Melissa carried her final bag through the front door without looking at me. Jason came last. He stopped beside Robert's photograph. For a long moment, he stared at his father's face. Dad would be ashamed of me. I could have comforted him. Once I would have. Instead, I said, probably. His eyes filled. I'm sorry, I know. Do you believe me? I considered the question. I believe you're sorry today. He nodded slowly. That's fair. He moved toward the door. Jason, he turned. I love you. His face crumpled. I love you too, Mom. But today, that doesn't mean I trust you. He closed his eyes, then nodded. I understand. After he left, I closed the door. I stood with my hand on the new deadbolt Melissa had installed. A week earlier, someone else had decided whether I could enter my own home. Now the house was quiet again, mine again. But as I turned the lock from the inside, I understood something I hadn't before. Getting my house back was the easy part. Getting my son back without losing myself in the process would take much longer. The room Robert built. The first morning after Jason and Melissa left, I woke before sunrise. For several seconds, I didn't know why the house felt different. Then I remembered. I was home. Not in a hotel room with curtains that never closed properly. Not at Rebecca's house pretending I wasn't worried. Not sitting in my car watching other people carry pieces of my life through my front door. Home. I walked downstairs barefoot and made coffee. The silence was familiar again. For years after Robert died, I had thought silence was something I needed to defeat. That morning, I understood it could also mean peace. Rebecca arrived before 9. She carried cleaning supplies in one hand and breakfast sandwiches in the other. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. No, you wanted to. She smiled. Fine. I wanted to. That distinction mattered to me now. We started with the living room. Melissa had packed more than I realized. Photographs, books, small ceramic pieces Robert and I had collected on road trips. Even the old wooden bowl that had sat on our coffee table since Jason was a child. Rebecca opened boxes while I decided where everything belonged. She never said you should put this here, she asked. Where do you want this? Such a simple question. After everything that had happened, it felt like respect in its purest form. By noon, the living room looked like mine again. Then Rebecca opened the trunk of my car. Robert's chair was still inside. I'll get it, she said. We'll get it. Together we carried it through the front door. The uneven legs scraped across the hardwood as we returned it to Robert's office. I laughed unexpectedly. Rebecca looked at me. What your father spent 30 years insisting that chair was level. She smiled. It's definitely not. Never tell him that. For a moment, I could almost hear Robert arguing with us. Then the laughter disappeared and I looked around the room. Melissa had moved several boxes from the shelves. Robert's drafting lamp had been unplugged. A cabinet stood open. I began putting things back. Rebecca cleaned the shelves while I worked at the desk. That was when I found the envelope. It had slipped behind the bottom drawer. I almost threw it into a pile of old receipts before I recognized Robert's handwriting. Dorothy. Just my name, nothing else. My hands began trembling. Rebecca noticed. Mom. I sat in Robert's chair. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside were 3 folded pages. The first line stopped me. Dorothy, if you found this because you finally decided to clean my desk properly, I'd like it noted that I was right about you being too organized. I laughed through my tears. That sounds like Dad, Rebecca whispered. I nodded. The letter had been written during Robert's illness. He knew he was dying. But instead of writing about death, he wrote about me. He told me not to let grief turn the house into a shrine. He told me to travel if I wanted. Paint the kitchen purple if it made me happy. Sell the house if I ever wanted to. Or stay until I was 95 just to irritate everyone who kept telling me to downsize. Then I reached the part that made me stop breathing. Our children will love you, but they will also have their own fears, their own marriages, their own mistakes. Don't use money to make them stay close. And don't let money convince you that someone is close when they're only waiting. I covered my mouth. Rebecca looked away, giving me privacy without leaving. I kept reading. If they stay, let it be because they love you, not because they're waiting for what you leave behind. The words blurred. For the first time since I found myself locked outside my house, I cried without trying to control it. Not because of Melissa, not even because of Jason. I cried because I missed Robert. I wanted his hand on my shoulder. I wanted him sitting across from me, telling me he had predicted all of this. I wanted one more ordinary Tuesday with him. Rebecca knelt beside the chair. You okay, No? She squeezed my hand. But I will be. That afternoon after Rebecca left, I read the letter again. Then I checked my phone. There were 4 messages from Jason. The first had arrived 2 days earlier. Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I won't keep bothering you. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about what I did. The second came the next morning. I drove past Dad's favorite hardware store today. I remembered how he used to make me return tools exactly where I found them. I guess I should have remembered that lesson sooner. The third was shorter. I hope you're okay. The fourth had arrived an hour earlier. I'm not asking about the trust. I'm not asking you to change anything. I just want you to know I understand why you did it. My thumb hovered over the screen. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him I loved him. I wanted to make the discomfort disappear. That was what I had always done. When Jason fell, I picked him up. When his first business failed, Robert and I helped stabilize him. When his marriage became tense, I pretended not to notice. Maybe Robert had been right. Sometimes love became dangerous when it refused to let another person feel consequences. So I didn't respond. Not yet. I placed the phone beside Robert's letter. Jason needed time, so did I. An apology made after losing control of a house was easy. I needed to know whether his remorse would still exist weeks later when there was no immediate reward attached to it. I folded Robert's letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer. Then I looked around his office. The chair was back. The lamp was plugged in. The photograph of Robert carrying young Jason on his shoulders hung where it belonged. Nothing was exactly as it had been before. Neither was I. Maybe healing wasn't restoring everything to its old position. Maybe healing meant deciding what deserved to return and what needed to remain changed. That evening, another message arrived from Jason. No question, no request, just 5 words. Good night, Mom. Love you. I stared at it for a long time. Then for the first time since he had stood behind that window and watched me carry his father's chair away from the trash, I typed back. Love you too. I didn't add that I forgave him. I wasn't there yet, but somewhere inside the room Robert had built with his letter beside me, and my home finally quiet again, I realized I no longer needed to decide everything at once. The door could stay closed for now. That didn't mean it had to stay closed forever. My son came without a key. 4 months passed before Jason stood on my porch again. A great deal happened during those 4 months, although very little of it happened quickly. Jason and Melissa separated 6 weeks after leaving my house. Rebecca heard first. She called me one evening and said, I thought you should know before somebody else tells you. I sat at my kitchen table. What happened? They're living apart. I closed my eyes. Part of me had expected it. Still, I felt no satisfaction. Their marriage had problems long before Melissa changed my locks. Debt secrecy, failed investments, and the habit of blaming each other had created cracks neither of them wanted to acknowledge. My house had simply exposed them. Has Jason called you? Rebecca asked. No. Are you going to call him? No. Rebecca was quiet. Then she said, Good. I smiled. You sound surprised. A little. So am I. The old Dorothy would have called immediately. She would have asked whether Jason needed money, a place to stay, help with a lawyer. She would have rushed toward his pain because that was what mothers were supposed to do. But Jason was 41. If he was going to rebuild his life, he had to learn that being loved did not mean being rescued. So I waited. Jason continued sending occasional messages. Nothing dramatic. Hope you had a good day. I drove past Miller's this morning. Made me think of Dad. Happy Sunday, Mom. Sometimes I replied, sometimes I didn't. He never asked about the trust, never asked whether Rebecca was still successor trustee, never asked whether he was still a beneficiary. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. Not the doorbell. 3 soft knocks. I was in the kitchen slicing apples. When I looked through the front window, I saw Jason. He stood beneath the porch light wearing a dark jacket, his hands empty. No flowers, no gift. No folder, no excuse disguised as an offering, just my son. I walked to the door. Then I noticed something. Jason still had the old key on his key ring. I could see it hanging beside his car key. The key no longer worked because I had replaced the locks after Melissa moved out. But Jason didn't know that. He could have tried it. He didn't. He had knocked. I opened the door halfway. Hi. Hi, Mom. For a few seconds, neither of us knew what came next. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk. You could have called, I know. Rain tapped against the porch roof. Jason looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Can I say something? Yes? He took a breath. I'm sorry. I waited. He seemed to expect me to interrupt. I didn't. I know I've said that before, he continued, but I don't think I understood what I was apologizing for. I folded my arms. What do you understand now? Jason looked past me into the hallway. His eyes briefly landed on Robert's photograph. Then he looked back at me. I kept telling myself Melissa changed the locks. She did. I kept using that like it meant I didn't. My throat tightened. Jason continued, I knew she called the locksmith. I knew she was moving things. I knew she wanted to start renovating. His voice became quieter. And I knew you hadn't agreed. Yes. I could have stopped it. Yes, I didn't. No excuses. No mention of Melissa pressuring him. No explanation about debt, just truth. The worst thing wasn't that she changed the locks, he said. His eyes filled. The worst thing was that I stood inside and let you stay outside. For a moment I couldn't speak. That was the sentence I had needed him to understand. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because until he understood where the betrayal actually happened, there was nothing for us to repair. Jason wiped his eyes. I saw you carrying Dad's chair. I know, I almost came outside, but you didn't. No. He nodded slowly. I was afraid if I took your side, everything Melissa and I were planning would fall apart. And did it? Yes. Was that my fault? No? The answer came immediately. Our problems were already there. I just wanted your house to fix them. There it was. Not Melissa wanted, I wanted. Jason finally owned the sentence. I started thinking about your home like it was an asset waiting for me, he said. I forgot it was the place you were still living your life. I looked at him for a long time. What do you want from me, Jason? Nothing. Everybody wants something. He gave a sad smile. Okay, I want to know whether someday you might forgive me. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't ask about money. He didn't ask me to restore anything in the trust, just forgiveness. I leaned against the doorframe. I need you to understand something. I'm listening. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. I know. No, I need you to really know. He nodded. I can forgive what happened and still never put you back in charge of my affairs. I understand. Rebecca remains successor trustee. I figured. Does that bother you? He considered it. It hurts. I appreciated the honesty, but I understand why. I studied his face. 4 months earlier, Jason would have argued. He would have explained. He would have asked what he needed to do to get the old arrangement restored. Now he simply stood in the rain and accepted the consequence. I think I can start forgiving you, I said. His eyes closed briefly. Thank you. But trust, he nodded. I have to earn it. Yes, I will. Don't promise me. He looked confused. Then what should I do? Live differently? Something in his expression softened. All right. The rain grew heavier. For the first time I realized we had been standing with the door half open for nearly 10 minutes. Jason still hadn't crossed the threshold. He was waiting. That mattered too. I opened the door wider. Would you like some coffee? His face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. I'd like that. He stepped forward, then stopped. "Is it okay?" I almost cried. "Yes, Jason." Only then did he enter. We sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I had once worried about our children's futures. Jason told me he had moved into a small apartment. He had begun working with a financial counselor, he was selling things he didn't need and dealing with his debts one payment at a time. He didn't ask me to save him, and I didn't offer. When he left an hour later, he stood on the porch and hugged me. "I love you, Mom. I love you too." I watched him walk to his car. Then I looked at the lock on my door. Months earlier, Jason had stood inside because he thought being my son gave him a claim on what was mine. That afternoon, he had stood outside and waited to be invited in. It was a small difference, but sometimes the smallest gestures tell you whether a person has truly changed. For the first time since this began, I believed my son might have what the deed could never say. A year after Melissa changed the locks on my house, Jason still knocked before entering, even when he knew I was expecting him, even when his car was the only one in the driveway, even when I called through the window, "Jason, you know I'm home." He knocked. At first I thought he was doing it because he felt guilty. Eventually I understood it had become something else: respect. One Saturday morning he noticed that part of the backyard fence was leaning. A year earlier he would have arrived with lumber and started repairing it without asking. This time he came into the kitchen. "Mom, the fence near the dogwood is getting bad. I know. Do you want me to fix it?" I smiled. Yes, that was how we rebuilt our relationship. Not through grand apologies, through questions. "Do you want me to? Would you like help? Is this okay?" Words that seemed ordinary until someone had taken away your right to answer them. Jason and Melissa's separation eventually became permanent. I never celebrated it. Melissa had crossed terrible boundaries, but Jason's choices belonged to Jason. Blaming her for everything would have allowed him to avoid the lesson that had changed him. He didn't do that anymore. He moved into a modest apartment and worked through his debt slowly. Once he joked that his furniture looked like it had been collected from 3 different yard sales. Was it 4? I laughed. He laughed too. I didn't offer to buy him new furniture. That was growth for both of us. Rebecca also began talking to her brother again. Their first few conversations were uncomfortable. Then one Sunday, Jason apologized to her. Not because she had been locked out, because he realized that by treating my house like his future property, he had also treated his sister as someone whose inheritance could be negotiated without her. Rebecca didn't forgive him immediately. I was proud of her for that. Eventually, though, we began having dinner together again. Not every week. Not because I demanded it, because they wanted to come. The trust remained unchanged. Rebecca stayed successor trustee. Jason never asked me to reconsider. One afternoon, William Harper came to the house so we could review my estate plan. We sat in Robert's old office. His uneven chair was still beside the desk. William glanced at it. That the famous chair. The one that nearly caused a family war. I thought the house did that. No, people did. He smiled. We reviewed everything carefully. I had made another decision, not about punishment, about purpose. After my death, the house would eventually be sold according to the terms I established. Rebecca would receive part of the proceeds. Jason would receive part too. I knew some people would disagree with me. They would say Jason deserved nothing after what he had done. Perhaps they would have made a different choice. But I didn't want my final decisions to be controlled by the worst week of my son's life. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending it never happened. That was why he would never again be placed in the position of successor trustee. But I had watched him spend a year accepting consequences without asking for a reward. That mattered. The third portion of the proceeds would go somewhere neither Jason nor Rebecca expected. A local housing assistance program serving older women facing housing instability and financial pressure from relatives. William read the provision twice. "You're certain?" "Yes." "What made you choose this?" I looked toward the front door. Because I had money knowledge and a lawyer, and I still spent several nights in a hotel because my own family locked me out. William nodded slowly. "And you're thinking about women who don't have those things?" "Yes." Some women had no William Harper, no Rebecca, no knowledge of deeds or trusts. Some surrendered because the people pressuring them sounded confident. I wanted what happened to me to protect someone else someday. A month later, Jason came for dinner. He arrived at 6, carrying a grocery bag. I saw him through the glass. Then came the knock. 3 gentle taps. I walked toward the door but stopped before opening it. For a moment I remembered another afternoon. My suitcase beside my feet. A new deadbolt. Melissa standing inside. Jason arriving and refusing to choose me. I remembered asking one simple question. "Did you read the deed?" Back then I thought the deed was the most powerful thing I had. It proved who controlled the house, it stopped Melissa's plans, it protected my property. But a year later I understood that paper had only solved the legal problem. It couldn't repair trust. It couldn't make Jason apologize. It couldn't teach him humility. And it couldn't force me to forgive. Those things had required choices. Jason knocked again. "Mom," I opened the door. "You're early. 6 is early now for you." He smiled and lifted the grocery bag. "I brought apple pie. Bribery, absolutely." I stepped aside. Jason waited. Even after a year, he waited. I smiled. "Come in." Only then did he cross the threshold. During dinner, Rebecca arrived with her husband. We argued about football, laughed about one of Robert's disastrous Thanksgiving turkeys, and ate too much pie. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody mentioned inheritance. Nobody asked what the house was worth. It was simply a house again. My house, our gathering place, a home. Later, after everyone left, I stood beside the front window. Jason reached his car, then turned and waved. I waved back. My eyes drifted toward the lock. For months, I had thought justice meant proving Melissa wrong. It didn't. Justice was getting my voice back. It was keeping boundaries without becoming bitter. It was allowing my son to experience consequences without deciding he was forever defined by his worst decision. And it was learning that forgiveness could open a door without surrendering ownership of the key. A deed can tell you who owns a house, but it can never tell you who deserves a place in your home. That part is written by the way we treat each other when we think no one can stop us. The greatest lesson I learned was that love does not require surrender. Sometimes the people closest to us convince themselves that concern gives them authority. They call control help. They call disrespect planning ahead. And if we are afraid of losing them, we may remain silent just to keep the peace. But peace without dignity is not peace. Jason was my son, and I loved him even when I could not trust him. That distinction changed everything for me. I could forgive him without restoring him as successor trustee. I could welcome him back into my kitchen without handing him control over my future. I could love him while allowing him to carry the consequences of his own choices. That is something I wish more people understood. Forgiveness and boundaries are not enemies. And inheritance is not a debt parents owe their children. What we leave behind is a gift. No child has the right to begin spending it while a parent is still living, dreaming, choosing, and building a life. Jason eventually understood that. What proved his change wasn't an apology. It was the year afterward when he kept showing up without asking what he would receive. And perhaps that is why I could finally open the door again. Not because I forgot, because we both learned. If you were in my place, would you have given Jason a second chance? Would you have kept him in the inheritance or removed him completely after what he did? I'd genuinely like to know what you think, so share your answer in the comments. And if this story reminded you that dignity, love, and boundaries can exist together, please like and subscribe. Sometimes protecting your home begins with knowing what the deed says. But protecting yourself begins with knowing that you still have the right to say no.